Welcome to the CPC meeting of November 14th. We'll start with a roll call. First, Eve.
Eve
Vice Chair.
Eisenberg, Select Board appointee.
Thank you, Eve. John? You're on mute, John.
We can read his lips.
Yeah.
Hi, it's John Kratzley, a Select Board appointee.
Thank you, John. Looking very dapper this evening. And Nancy?
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission appointee.
Paul?
Paul Bohm, Recreation Commission appointee.
And Edward?
Edward Larner, Concord Housing Authority appointee.
Great, thanks. And I'm Burton Flint, Select Board appointee. So tonight we get into the discussion. We've got the agenda, which I'm just pulling. I may have accidentally closed my agenda. I believe that the first agenda item was to go through the selection criteria for each application, and I think it would make a lot of sense to center the discussion by first identifying, do we still have it? Yeah, by first identifying the amount of funding that we now know we have available and the total sum of our applications. I think that will be a good way to steer the conversation. So you circulated that that Excel file earlier today. Do you want to? Can you present that or provide a summary on that? Thanks.
Sure, I'll bring up the screen. And there's about 2.6 million.
Okay, 2.6 million in, we think, available funds, and maybe we should break that down because some of that was returned funding, and some of it was funding that we'd saved for a rainy day in prior years, I believe, right?
Right. So are you able to see the screen? So
yes, we can. Thanks very much.
So there was 469,000 left over from previous years. They project about 1.9 million in revenue. There's 250 in the open space reserve account, which totals 2.6 million in change.
Okay.
Plus, we had talked about how I guess the Concord Housing Authority is planning on returning about 240,000 to the CPC. So that does not yet show up on this chart.
And so just to dig into these so we know these numbers. So the easy ones are the projected CPA funds reserve. That's projected, but it's a pretty accurate number based upon what we know about the current law, current revenue intake by the state, that we will, and by our property tax revenues, that we will have 1.945 available as a combination from current tax, property tax surcharge revenues plus state match, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And then the 250,000 open space reserve account, that was funding that we put aside. Was it, I don't know if it was all last year, but it likely was because I think we were undersubscribed last year that we put aside. Yeah, Paul, you've got your hand up. You're the treasurer.
That was the open space part of the Christopher Heights clawback. There was a housing part. There was a open space part of it.
Okay, so that was funding that had been previously specifically allocated for a particular open space project, and we said let's roll that over into a reserve account. The intent there being, I mean, I think in virtually every year we have open space funding that's in excess of that, but the intent being that would be there, in part because open space often comes in big slugs, like because there's land acquisition opportunities that come along, so we want to have some reserve funding. And then can you walk us through the prior year fund balance? This is where I always get confused because I feel like we always draw down as much as we can and try to get to zero, and then we come back each year and find out we have a big prior year fund balance. Okay. And if that's a question that we need the town treasurer to speak to, or
right, and I did ask that question, but it will take me a minute to find the answer to it.
I don't remember that we left that much on the table last year. I could be totally wrong. So maybe it was a couple of prior years, I think, in total.
So,
Right, it's the same question. We had returned about, or you all had returned about 60,931 from grants that were completed.
mhm.
Okay.
So and there was a negative balance the previous year. So you're right, that didn't add up to the 400,000. So I asked the question, and the finance department said, as you may recall, the town received an additional 111,772 of state matching funds in FY23, which were not taken into consideration when the FY24 projection was made. So this money would come a part of the undesignated fund balance. Plus, investment income came in much higher than anticipated by 100,000. And
Thank you, inflation.
Yeah, and finally, there was no appropriation made from the previous year's undesignated fund balance, as we have seen in
Okay.
years.
Okay, so that gets us about there. And let me pause and say, we're joined. Sue, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sue Felshen, Planning Board nominee.
Thank you. And I want to make special note that Sue has a planning board meeting right now and elected to join us, the CPC. So thank you very much for your time this evening, Sue. This is where we get to brass tacks, so it's worth your time. Paul, yes, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be disciplined on this meeting, raise my hand, but maybe a lot of it. The 1.9 million, do we know how much of a state match was in there? I thought the state match was going to be pretty lean, but it looks pretty good. Do we know what the breakdown was? And what percentages from our tax dollars versus state match?
Yes, let's see. That was in the letter. So let's see. The projected surcharge was 1,509,769,000. The state match was 377,422 or 442, and then the earnings on investments was 57,974.
Well, so that the state match is in about the 20% range. Is that right? I did that math in my head, but
I'm not sure.
That's not right.
that's a lot better. Well, that's a little bit better than I was expecting. So now that's great. I had been, as we were reviewing applications, I don't know about the rest of the committee, I had been thinking we would be looking at a number somewhere between 1.8 and 2 million. Assuming that we wanted to consume all those amounts that are potentially available to us, including the unspent prior funds, the 250K allocation towards land conservation, not land conservation. What's the category? And
Open space.
Open space. Thank you, Paul. We're at 2.6, and what's our total in terms of the applications that we've received? I think it was about 2.6. Is that, if I'm not mistaken?
It's 2.5. So
2.5. Okay.
here's the total requests, and here's the total that's available.
Okay. Great. So then the easy thing to do would be to say, okay, our funds available exceed the requests, except we're in this position because for one reason or another, our predecessor committee of last year or years prior to that has kept some money in the bank. I think now that the agenda for the meeting is to go through each application and compare it against the funding criteria. I was thinking that it would be helpful to just run through the committee's criteria for funding as sort of a refresher in terms of the things that we look for, the project eligibility requirements from our procedures manual. But it's perhaps the case that the committee members are sort of already generally familiar with it. Would people find that to be beneficial, or do we feel like we are aware of what we're directed to be funding?
We should know.
We
Nancy,
should
yeah.
know. I feel sub-aware, but I'm not entirely aware, but I'm sure I can wing it as we go along.
Okay. Well, I mean, so Sue, I think, just to draw your attention to it, because I know when I was new on this committee, I sort of had, no idea of the structure around what we do. There are general selection criteria that's outlined in our procedures manual, which is available on the CPC website. And there is a list of factors which should or will be considered in reviewing each application. There are, it looks like, about 21, 22 different factors that are to be taken into account, and should guide us in terms of the weighing a particular application. I don't want to read through them all in the meeting this evening, but for anybody that's inclined, that's a good place to start, is the general selection criteria in our procedures manual. With that said, yeah, Paul, you've got your hand up.
One question I had on eligibility. It's
Yep.
my understanding that any expenditures for any of these projects that already have been incurred are not eligible to be reimbursed. So these all have to be forward-looking expenditures. Is that correct?
And I think the questions come to you previously, and maybe you've got the specific answer.
Right. I've asked that question of, town council and of the state coalition, but I am not getting a straight answer. So
Okay.
I can
Are you?
keep after them, because that's a big question.
Yeah. And Paul, obviously you're asking that in particular with respect to the one application where they've incurred some expenses so far.
Well, at least one. I thought it was 51 Walden, and I forget which one it was.
51
we
Walden.
had discussed it, and we were uncertain whether it was eligible. But yeah, that was at least with that one in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm spinning through the list right now. I mean, because there could be two things. One of which is the requirements of the Community Preservation Act, and one of which is a procedures manual. And I'm just spinning through our procedures.
Which should conform to the law.
They should, but they may not cover things which are otherwise expressly stated in the law, right? I'm not seeing a requirement that it be all forward-looking funding, but that could very well be a requirement of the law.
Well, I mean, let's take an extreme, a project that's already been completed, so that wouldn't be eligible for funding. That's an extreme example, but I don't know what we probably need to get some clarification on that, I think.
Right.
I can go either way. It's just we need to figure out what's illegal.
Right. Eve, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to note that in our community preservation plan, these criteria are on page 32, 33, and 34. And I've been through the law now a couple of times too, and maybe I'm missing like a huge thing, but what is this procedures manual that you're referring to? And does it say stuff about expenditures already made, but also, what we're allowed to fund with regards to internet, like online resources, that kind of thing? Because I keep hearing rumors that we're allowed to do this or not allowed to do that. And I feel like there's a manual I'm missing.
Okay. That is an excellent question. So where I came to the procedures manual is on our committee website. There's, hang on.
I just did that and searched for the word procedure and found it right off.
You did?
Okay. Oh, somehow I have gotten myself to community preservation, the state's community preservation website, and it won't let you backtrack. Yeah, it was that there's a CPC manual, and then there's a procedures manual, and that's the one I went to. I'm just looking to see where you can find that, Eve. Okay, so if you go to the main CPC page,
Mhm.
and you scroll down, you'll see that listing of the members and so forth, and then the CPC program documents. There's the final CPC plan that's been approved for 2023, and right under that is the CPC procedures manual.
Okay, thank you.
Which,
Sure,
by
and
the way, claims to be a draft document.
well, that's probably a Scrivener's error, but it looks
Okay.
like
It's
given
just the
it's been
title of
published, but
the file name says
Yeah.
draft, but it's
Yeah.
okay.
So let me pause here and ask, how would folks like to proceed? Do we want to, in the past, this has been kind of an open discussion. Do we want to do a straw poll in terms of doing sort of a first pass through application and either considering creating a series of buckets of, we think this application is great and should be in the funding pile, versus this one should be open for further discussion, versus this one we think should be disqualified for some reason, sort of the first breakdown of applications, or do we want to go through each one sort of in the order they appear on our website? Let me just quick ask for a sense, but first, Edward, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, well, just answering that, my opinion is, can we try to put the housing groups all together? I know Keith yeah, I see Keith is here.
Yep.
I know there's been a lot of discussion since you suggested we try to coordinate better between the different ones. And so maybe he can tell you where we all are and what this is going to affect, how, the different projects that have been, submitted.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Edward. I appreciate the suggestion, and Keith, I got a chance literally to read probably every other line of the email you sent me earlier today. But it sounds like there's been some coordination between CHA, the CHDC, and yourself across these three buckets that we've got applications for, and not to sort of take things in a haphazard manner, but I think that this discussion and the information we'll get from Keith is probably will inform much of the rest of the decisions that we have to make this evening and in our subsequent meetings. So, Keith.
Thanks, Burton, and hello all. Keith Bergman, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. I don't know what it is about the Cafe Nero, but a lot of town business gets done there. I think my initial meeting with Burton was there, and it was very, and Lee Smith and it was very helpful. And so a group of us got together. Mike Lawson convened us. It was myself, Lee Smith, from the CHDC, and Rick Leifler from the Housing Authority, and we talked about what our respective needs were and what we could do to sort of speak with a united voice on what the needs of the housing groups were, and we came up with a solution, and I did some meeting notes which went out to chairs of all of our housing roundtable groups last week, but I wanted to make sure that Burton saw it prior to this meeting. But anyway, after the recent conversations that we've had between those three housing groups, and that includes that I attended the Housing Authority meeting last Thursday. I attended the CPC, the CHDC's meeting on last Tuesday, and we seem to be of one mind with the following idea, that is that the trust is making available in its funds in the current fiscal year, for fiscal 2024. The trust has a current balance of $3 million and change, for which we have programmed certain projects, some for this year, some for next year, as is explained in great detail in the application that we submitted to CPC for an additional $500,000 for next year. So the approach is that since we have two projects that have applied, that were not initially on our radar screen, but which did apply to the CPC for funding, specifically CHDC for $267,000 for their buy down program, and the Housing Authority for its property acquisition program, $400,000, along with the trust requesting $500,000 to continue to fund housing production plan priority projects. The trust took a couple of votes at its meeting last Tuesday in order to make funding available for both of those projects from the trust this year without needing CPC funding next year. And the votes that we took were first we have a two-step process where we maintain a list of priority projects that are ready to go to implement the housing production plan. So step one was to program those two projects that I just mentioned, Housing Authority's property acquisition program, CHDC's buy down program, to program both of those for this year with available funds that the trust has. And then secondly, once they were on that plan, we voted to invite both of those groups to submit funding applications to the trust, and that we would act on those funding applications. It won't be a stretch for them to do the application, because we've modeled our application after yours, and I've already received the Housing Authority's application, which says at the end of it that it notes that the Housing Authority has also applied for CPC funds for this project, but will withdraw its application to the CPC if trust funding is approved. So the trust will continue to request funds that it needs as sort of an umbrella organization. And the list of priority projects that we maintain is done in concert with all of our 7 Concord Housing Roundtable groups. It was a group effort to identify the universe of projects, and we're working with our partners, some more closely than others, because the Housing Authority and the CHDC are among our roundtable partners, and we're working very closely with them to try to meet their needs sooner rather than later. We have the available fund balance. We took a look at whether we would need to reprogram any intended uses for this year, things that we had already planned to spend money on. And those things include, for example, completing the 3 new units at Assabet River Bluff, for which we think will be about $1.5 million. Some pre-development expenses, $50,000 for Junction Village, the reboot. Funding the CHDC small grant program for $50,000, and funding two of the town's requests. First, to acquire surplus state property at 91B Main Street, and to be a funding source if the town seeks to waive the sewer improvement fee for the 51 affordable units in the Novo Riverside Commons 40B. So when we look at what the total cost is for those, we had plugged in $600,000 for the acquisition of the surplus state property. And the most recent information we have from the state right now is that they're trying to give it to us for free. Which is great, and even if they fail, that we need some money to do pre-development work in fiscal 2025, that we'll have an available funding source. So we've made the judgment we can add those 2 additional projects without bumping any of the other projects that we have. And just wanted to share that information with you as you consider what you want to do. But I think that all the housing groups are speaking with one voice on this.
Okay,
And
Keith,
and actually, thanks for the nudge after that was taken to heart, and I think we've worked it out.
okay, thank you for that update, Keith, very much. And Eva, I'll get to you real quick. I just want to maybe do a quick summarization, which is that people came together in Cafe Nero. We had 3 groups going after funding, and I think there was a little bit of a view that those were overlapping requests. The trust is going to act as the bank for the requests that have come before us. You mentioned CHA is good with going to the trust for that 400,000 rather than to CPC. Is Lee Smith also, is he of the same mind for the CHDC?
Well, I believe so, but I think one of the delays is that they've got as we all do, limited staff, and they've got priorities where it's going to be another month before they can file their application with us. They're doing they've got RFPs that we're preparing for Assabet and Junction Village.
But in principle, he was part of that
they're-
discussion, and he's
they're not, they're in
and
principle
understands
they
the
are,
votes
and
you've
they're not
done.
far behind. Yeah.
Okay, so presumably, I guess my last question would be is when you said CHA is and Rick, you're feel free to chime in here. CHA is okay, sort of essentially withdrawing its application subject to getting the funding from the trust. When will CHA know that they get the funding from the trust? How long is that procedural timeline?
Next Tuesday.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Rick, if you're listening, I guess you're good with that.
Yes.
Okay. That's great. And then so I don't have the number in front of me, Keith, but I think your application was for 500,000, and that's going to the projects you listed. This funding is essentially coming out of the funds you had banked, but it turns out that one of the projects you'd listed that this 500K would be going towards, you think we're actually going to be able to obtain that property, that surplus property at a significantly reduced cost.
Right. And we could certainly, if you'd like, we could certainly issue, a revised, we will have another meeting next Tuesday. We could issue a revised description of what do we think that our priorities look like for next year, because I think the main cost will be in supporting the development of the surplus state property, and or some additional funds for for either for year 2 of either of these projects that the Housing Authority and the CHDC are doing for property acquisition. And
let me so one of the things we always have a concern about is that once the applications are filed and the window closes, that the applications can't be expanded essentially to cover new things or additional funding, but they can be clarified. It sounds like this CHA and CDC funding, the 267,000 and the 400K, that's essentially coming out of the money that you have banked going forward, and that you're allocating funds to. Going forward, the scope of your application for the 500,000 is more or less unchanged. It sounds to me like, because that application wasn't covering those projects, and you're not redirecting different funds into that bucket.
Right, that's exactly correct, because while we may have given an illustration of the sorts of projects that we would do, the priorities will change. It will be an iterative process when the Housing Roundtable reconvenes quarterly and then takes a step back and says, all right, what are our priorities right now based on opportunities? All we're applying for is more cash to put in the fund to draw from, but it's not. But the money we're requesting for next year, just like the money that we received for this year, it's not earmarked to any particular project. It supports the bottom line of the cause of pursuing implementation of housing production plan strategies. So to that extent, it's unchanged. The scope is unchanged.
Okay, thank you, Keith, very much for that update. Thank you for the collaboration with the other housing groups. That's great. Paul, I see your hand raised, but Eve had you had your hand raised. I want to make sure we've come back to you if you still got a question, Eve.
You asked my question, Burton, which was when would they know that they were getting that funding so that they could withdraw their application with us? And it sounds like it's next Tuesday, which is not soon enough for our next Tuesday meeting. So that means December 5th, we would know for sure. Right?
The next next week's Tuesday meeting, I think we're hoping that we don't have to have, well, because if we do, Eve, you're chairing it because I will not be available. But so December, yeah, that's right. Paul, your question.
Well, it's not, I just want to, Keith, I want to thank you and Rick and Lee and Cafe Nero for resolving this. This was going to take a lot of energy at this meeting, and you've made it much simpler. And I think I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you. And I think it's a perfect resolution.
I would point out it puts us in a little bit of an interesting situation, which is a week ago I thought that we were going to be about $600,000 or $700,000 short. If we reduce these two applications, to which were combined $667,000, that means that if we fully funded every other application, and we've got to consider them on the merits and whether they qualify, we would be leaving a little over that, just about $700,000 in the bank for future committees. Then we have to weigh the wisdom of, saving money for a rainy day versus putting our tax dollars to use when, before they get diluted by time and inflation. Yes, Sue.
It seems to me that we're in a bit of an odd situation in that we did dedicate money over the years to the Junction Village project, which then collapsed and is now up possibly to be revived. And it's not entirely unreasonable to expect that it will be wanting that money back when it gets revived. Now, one of the issues with the project, of course, was that the people of the town were not comfortable with how it kept coming back to the well again and again. But nevertheless, people of Concord weren't opposed to CPC requests at all, just to the repeated nature. So as an unusual situation, it would not be unreasonable for us to bank some money on that expectation. And while I have the floor, I'm just going to add how pleased I am at this resolution of the situation about the different housing organizations. It seems to me that half the reason for the Municipal Housing Trust is so that it can have the money to disperse without having to wait for a whole nother town meeting. But if the money just goes to CHDC or just goes to the Housing Authority or somebody, it's stuck there. So if there would be a problem with the Housing Trust giving out the money quickly enough, the necessity would be to change its rules. But it looks like this has all been worked out, and I think that's just great.
I'd second that. Thanks for that input.
And it was Bert who really started it by saying we needed to coordinate.
I'm not taking for that. I think that was Paul who was pushing.
Well, no, I think Bert didn't want to have a 5-hour meeting.
Well, that's always the case. Yes. Okay.
So thanks. Yeah, thanks very much for the positive feedback. And I'll just say, if ever you've got money that you don't know what to do with, that if you put it in the trust, it'll go to good use. So thanks so much.
We just need an application.
Bert, also looking at the quick look at the procedures manual, it said one of the first things the CPC should do is to decide whether to put any money in reserve for the future, and we've done that almost by default here in which is probably not
that raises a very interesting point. And Sue, you triggered that thought in my mind when you mentioned Revive Junction Village, which I've not heard wind of, but and maybe you could share what you might know about that. But it does make me think that we're in this position, and if we were to bank funds for a future committee's consideration, it might very well be for for housing funds, because we think that that's going to be a need. On the other hand, and I would say we also know that there are funding mechanisms that are coming into place, or will very likely be coming into place for housing, and that may skew the formula. But that's for, and Anne, I guess I would ask the question: when we leave money on the table, can we just leave it in undesignated reserves, or are we obliged to allocate it to one of our funding buckets? I had my assumption had been was that allocations to particular funding budget were in part to make sure we covered the 10% requirement for each category.
Yes, I think you're right. I don't think you need to put them in a particular reserve unless you're falling short in a particular category.
Okay.
Under the 10%.
Okay. So, John, you've got your hand patiently raised.
Just some clarification from Keith. Is your application from the trust number 01 up at the top of our list for 500,000? Is that
That's right.
still is that still viable, or did I hear you say it could be revised down?
Yeah, no, I would not say that, because we're requesting $1 million collectively this year from the CPC and the town ARPA funding. So our pledge drive is to get $1 million this year, and we do see ourselves as the bank for the other housing entities. And
Okay,
and
so that's still viable for 500,000.
yes.
Okay.
And just to be clear, John, I mean, I think for the president, until we hear from from Rick for the CHA and from Lee Smith, all the applicants applications remain viable. But it looks like we've got resolution. Yeah.
Two may go.
That's right. And Nancy, I saw your hand up. If you had a.
Oh, I was just noticing that there is a category called undesignated fund balance, which
Right.
Previous question, I think. Yeah,
and I think, gosh, if we had Diane here, who knows all this stuff in and out, I think that we could leave things in an undesignated reserve, and the reason for example, we have the 250 in open space. I don't think last year we were short on open space funding, but we may have thought, let's put that there because open space tends to be something that comes along in big chunks, periodic chunks.
Exactly.
Right. Same with housing, for that matter. Yes, Anne, you've got your hand raised.
Right. I think you were required to put the money back into open space reserve because you were taking it away from an open space project. It was the Junction Village project.
Oh, right. It had already been tagged. That's right. Thank you for that reminder.
To go back into that same bucket.
Okay. So having gone through that, I think where that leaves us is now we're at about, assuming what plays out as Keith described, we are roughly at about $1.9 million in funds that have been applied for. We have about $2.6 million. I think that it would probably make sense at this juncture to go through, I think it would be very helpful if we went through each project and got a sense of the board. First, the ones that we are unreservedly in favor of and funding in full, and the second one that we want for further discussion. I think that would be the first breakdown in categorization that we've done in the past, as I recall, so that we can sort of narrow this down. And Anne, are you able to display a list of the projects and the funding amounts so that we can go through and perfect. Does anybody on the board object to this approach of doing a first pass? I think this will get a list.
Right.
Okay. All right. So that said, maybe A, B, and C, we sort of table their special cases because we've just talked through them. Town of Housing, the Regional Housing Service Office, am I may have been one of the designated committee members for this project. This has been something that we've funded every year. Talked about the return we get on investment. I am in favor of this. Again, would anybody object to putting this into the funded bucket? Okay.
I'm sorry, you're talking about A, sorry.
No, we're now jumping to,
I'm sorry.
I said, skip over A, B, and C because we've just sort
Okay,
of
yeah,
gone through them
okay,
in their
yes.
special case.
Okay.
Going to D,
Fine.
this is Liz's office, Liz
yeah.
Rust's office. So the total amount recommended, I would be recommending 33,500 because of the return we get on this investment. Does anybody feel otherwise? This is my view, one of the easier ones.
That's good.
Okay, let's go to the E, the Assabet River Bridge Trail Design and Permitting. And I think, who were the folks on this? Was it Sue and?
Yeah, it was me and Diane. Diane's not here. If you ask me all the reasons why this is a good idea, we'll be here till tomorrow. So I just won't even start.
Okay, so you recommend it, and there were no, I guess, and just one thing I'd ask on each project, there were no issues you saw with it being fitting within our funding criteria.
That's correct.
Okay. I am also unreservedly in favor of this, and it's a project that this committee has funded prior things on before, and this is finally the point where we see the huge return on our investment of I think our investment will be still under $1 million, and we're looking at getting about almost $9 million in state funding. Does anybody feel that this shouldn't be in a fully funded category?
I think
Okay.
it's even a better idea now that the Novo project is likely to proceed.
Yeah, I can't, that is, the synergy there is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And yeah, Paul, we could talk about that and the project in your neighborhood, and yeah. All right. But though, speaking of things nearby, the Hillcrest Conservation Land Steps. Who was anybody on this call assigned to this project and want to speak?
Yeah, I was along with Ed.
Okay. Ed or John, do you have any comments, pro or con, or concerns on this one?
There were issues about what the final executed version might be because it's such a steep location. But I certainly support going ahead with design and permitting.
And that's what this funding is for, is the design permitting. We would expect further request for build, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know what Ed thought.
Oh, no, I totally agree. I'm slightly skeptical that they'll be able to do this because it's the one-to-one slope. And I think it's really part of the Kennedy pond association wanting to do it. And then the town's taken over the responsibility for it, and I'm wondering if the town really wants the responsibility of something that's very kind of precarious. But I think it's a worthwhile project. I'm just wondering if they're really going to come to fruition.
Well, and on that point, Ed, I would say that I think it was originally the community that brought this forward, and then over time engaged, and then the town has come along, and now that we know that the town is sponsoring this, that speaks volumes to that coordination that's happening. As somebody, I would say, as somebody that loves that we have a lot of conservation land, but a lot of it that sort of we forget that the public has access to and that the public can't get to. I think that this is a great project, which I have seen our NRC sort of incrementally put together pieces, which over the course of literally generations, you realize the results, because you've got to do a little piece here, a little piece there, a little piece there, and then all of a sudden you have a necklace of projects that all work together. this is something that I think this connection for the Thoreau Hills neighborhood, eventually potentially being a connection around that Kennedy Pond to access to the middle school, for example, is excellent. We've got engaged neighborhoods. I would definitely be in favor of this, even though ultimately the solution may require repelling. I think it's I think it's a good one. Paul, yes, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to, I think the other benefit of this is that it's kind of a bottoms up effort. And, I and others have been encouraging for a few years to get a lot more community involvement. So it's not necessarily the departments putting applications forward, but it's individuals getting departments on board. And I think this is a good example of that. And, hopefully there'll be more of these kind of projects where it starts at a community level and then gets department support, and I think it's a good precedent.
I'd second all that, Paul. Thanks. All right. So how do we, with that advocacy, how do we feel about whether this is in the funding recommendation column or for further discussion? And further discussion is not necessarily, it doesn't mean it's a strike against the project. It just means maybe there's any open issues. I just want to be clear on that.
I say funded.
Okay, thanks, John. Anybody object to putting it there? And if we put it there and some has a reservation later, we can come back to it.
Well, this one does strike me as a project that is not urgent to do immediately. So if we find ourselves running short on funding somewhere, it doesn't have to be done now. It's going to be requiring a complete redo of whatever is there in terms of how many populations it serves. It's not only geographically limited, it's also going to be limited to able-bodied people. And there's no urgency for, say, the Concord 250. So it seems, I'd put it pretty high on our list of postponability, but that's not to say we shouldn't do it. Just I don't see that it's a complete no-brainer to fund this year.
Nice insights. Yeah, those all make a lot of sense. High on the list of postponability, but a worthy project nonetheless. I like that categorization. Nancy.
I'm just coming back to something that the committee rejected before, but in the past, planning and land management has given us a prioritized list. And in this case, I think it would be interesting. And just looking at the other requests, the open space requests, kind of in Sue's court on this, that it's a great project, but there's a lot of dollars in that category that are also high priority. So maybe just thinking about it.
So
I think it's a fun project, but
what I'm hearing is everybody's in favor, but this could be something, a couple of members are suggesting it could be something that we could revisit. So maybe funding with an asterisk on it and if we're looking to find room in the budget, we could come back to it because of those characteristics. Yeah. Paul.
Well, I'm a little confused. There obviously is room in the budget, and I haven't heard any negative other than the fact that it could be postponed. There might be others that could be postponed. I'm not hearing any reason why we shouldn't fund it because we're going to have enough money. So,
well, we would have enough money to fund everything, but we don't know what we would like to set aside for the future.
okay.
So let's put it. I hear you. What you're both saying, I think, is concordant. Let's and you put the asterisk there. I think that's good. And just to remind us what Sue and Nancy have said about this, I think, but keeping it in that column makes sense. Let's move to G, the APOD program. This is an interesting one. And actually, let me first ask, was anybody on the call assigned to this project?
That would be me and Paul.
Yep.
And I can't speak for Paul, but I can think of like 6 reasons why this speaks directly to what we're supposed to be doing.
Okay.
So I would hope that we go ahead and fund this thing.
Yeah, I mean, the last time this came up, my only hesitation was, gee, would the technology work? And it's worked in spades, and it's provided a natural resource that, for use without cancellation. So I think it's really money well spent.
Yeah, this is almost the classic why CPC funding should be preserved as a mechanism, because you can imagine if this just needed to be straight, town appropriations funding that go out to multiple bidders and all the rest and all of that. I mean, I know we live within the appropriations and procurement laws, but I know that this came before the town. They sort of said, we don't really know about this, and then people stepped up, got it done, and now here we are. It succeeded beyond people's wildest dreams, and it's not just the fact that the pond's clean, but it's that the town's and the community's multi-million-dollar investments in that White Pond Beach. It means the beach can be open as seemingly as a result, and some significant part as a result of this. I'm hugely in favor of this. Sue.
Yeah, can someone remind me what Delia said? I remember my concern reading this application the first time was, what about the substantial service contract costs going forward? Would the NRD be coming back to the CPC? But I think that Delia said that the service contract would be folded into their ordinary budget. And then there's the question of, well, the thing only lasts a decade or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that could be addressed at some future date.
Yeah, this is a little unusual. We're buying a giant pond skimmer. The town's going to pay for the person to clean the skimmer out. And there was a question as to whether, are we really buying a pond skimmer? Because could they use it at other sites, or is it ours? Where is it going to be stored? Those are details that might be good to dig into. But what we were told was, we are buying the equipment. It will last for 10 years. The town will cover the operating costs on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah,
that's what Delia
I
said.
do support this, because it does seem like the capital cost of buying the pond skimmer is suitable for CPC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Agree.
All right. So, Anne, I think we're ready to put $30,000 in that column. Okay, that brings us to H, which is the Concord 250 Permanent Memorial Subcommittee application for funding 250 trees for the 250th initiative. The committee applicants for this, I've just got to pull these up so I know. Is it Paul and Sarah?
I think so.
Okay. Paul, in the absence of Sarah, did you have any? I'm just confirming the committee assignments. Any comments on this application?
I think there's a lot of town support. They probably could find funding elsewhere, but I think it is probably a CPC worthy funding. Has a lot of town support. Concurrent with the 250th anniversary. Could that money be spent elsewhere? Sure, but I think it's worthwhile spend. It's not the most enthusiastic project for me. I mean, I don't know. I'm just I would support it, but I'm not jumping up and down and saying it's a great project. It has a lot of there's a lot of enthusiasm in town. It has a lot of cultural significance. It has virtually no recreational value. It's all open space value, and
So is your concern is a little bit towards that split of the you'd prefer to see it under open space?
Well, it is open space. No, it's just in general. It's a worthwhile project. The town plants a lot of trees each year. Do we want 125,000 more for 250 more? I don't want to be the Scrooge here. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for planting trees. especially when unnamed 40B projects may be taking down trees. But so I like trees.
Yeah.
Funny.
Okay. Eve, I'll go to you next.
Okay, I just wanted to say that on my September 8th CPC applications received file, this is listed as only open space, not as open space and recreation. That also, there was some question about whether like the trees that the town already purchased would be part of the 250 trees, and then like how will they tell people that we bought 250 trees? Like, were those trees going to get plaques, or are they going to go on public space or private space? And so in my mind, it was maybe not so well organized. I don't even want to say that because I know they had already decided what trees they were going to get and they were aiming for places to put them. But I think this was the one presentation where some of our questions were, well, we had some open questions about it. So I like trees too. I'm not going to say trees are bad. Trees are good, but that I guess that I'm with Paul on the enthusiasm factor for this one.
Okay. And then Nancy.
I think what I was going to say was almost exactly what Eve said. And I think they are looking at the overlap with Public Works in terms of their planting program. And I know also that there are a couple of major trees that might be privately funded or somehow dealt with differently. So I think I love this project. Because I speak for the trees too. I think it's great, but I don't mind if it goes to see more specificity at the next meeting.
Go for more specificity at the next meeting, meaning we send them back to come back with additional detail for a future application, or we ask them for additional detail on this application and maybe get that clarified.
This one.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. Edward, you're next, please.
Yeah, I just remember an article I read about a couple of months ago in the New Yorker about tree planting all over the planet and how much has been done and how little has survived. And I just remember, buying trees for Israel and back in the 50s, things like that. And I think we need to have some kind of follow-up, maybe, or maybe a commitment that they're not going to just plant these trees for 2025 and then just let the town take care of them or not take care of them, however it works out.
That's a really good point. And I will say that the town, when they plant trees, well, this is maybe a slightly different project, but that for folks' awareness, if you want a tree, not just between the sidewalk and the street, but literally in your front yard within a certain number of feet of the street, the town will plant it there, and then they will commit to maintaining that tree for the first year of its growth. So they actually come around and will water those and the like. But I guess that you're talking about sort of a longer term commitment. Sounds like.
Well, the article just talked about all these trees being planted, say in India, where they were having wetlands being absorbed by cities and so forth, and how it just good intentions, leading down the road to hell, So.
Well, fair. That's fair enough. Yeah. Okay. Paul. Yeah.
On one end of the spectrum here, we could say, this is a worthwhile project. We like trees. Go forth and plant. On the other hand, I know we had questions at the discussion. Well, how democratic is the selection going to be? Is it going to be West Concord and Concord Center? Is it going to be on private land or public? Where are these trees going to be planted? And maybe that's not our role to kind of micromanage the process, but just it felt to me like I didn't know enough to say I'm wildly enthusiastic. But unless we basically say go forth and plant, and we love it no matter where you do it. So I'm being a little bit, I'm showing my uncertainty here in
Okay.
this.
Well, so based on these discussions, I've asked Krista Collins, who is the applicant, or who put together the application, to join. She's on now.
Yeah.
And so, Krista, thank you so much for joining on short notice. We've had a few questions around. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is, as we're narrowing down, we're doing an initial sort of assessment of each application of, do we put it in the, yes, that's great, 2 thumbs up, we're going to fund that bucket, or do we put it in the bucket of, let's talk about it further? And so far yours is, there's been more discussion of on the application, and the questions have been around, is this sort of just Eve, if I may characterize it, is this just sort of additional money that's going to Public Works where they're buying some additional trees in addition to what they're regularly planting, and in accordance with their regular tree planting program? Or is this specially designated trees? We know that there's 250 that are going to be planted in accordance with a particular plan. How would they be maintained? If anybody else wants to jump in with questions that maybe they'd like clarified for Krista.
This
Well-
is how is the commitment to maintaining them.
So that was how long is the commitment to maintaining?
You know,
Yeah. So are we sticking a bunch of trees in and sort of all of a sudden we might have a lot of dead saplings around town, or would we envision that these things are part of a sort of a long-term maintenance program from the town?
Okay, so yeah, why doesn't Sue ask her question and then I can address all those things?
Okay.
Sure.
Sue?
I
Okay,
would
so-
Ed Larnham ask that last question.
Okay,
Thanks, Ed.
so to collect all the questions first, Paul half upstaged me with his question about micromanagement. I had a lot of questions about this project earlier, but I didn't want to micromanage the project since it did seem like it was in large part an extension of Public Works. But, will all of the trees be accessible for at least viewing from a sidewalk, so that they're accessible at some point in some degree to people of all abilities? Well, I always wondered this about Public Works. Will trees be chosen to cater to some of them to the high school tree list, so that there will be trees around town that can be handily identified by our high school freshmen? When are we ever going to be dropping some nice black walnut trees on walnuts on people's heads without having to slip over to that one black walnut? But again, I don't want to micromanage the project. If the issue is we should supplement Concord Works' budget of how much trees there are with a little extra for the 225th, for the 250th anniversary, then I'm actually okay with that. But still, okay, I'll just stop there.
Oh, sorry, can I just add one last thing if you're going to list up the questions?
Please. Yeah.
Just wanted to know how this was being advertised. Are we just adding to a budget that trees are being bought and then no one will know about it, or how, it's not an event and it doesn't get assigned. So, okay.
So
Okay.
that's a great question, if I may. It sounds like the gist of these questions are, how much is this a sort of a special program? How will this be distinguished as a special 250 program versus just plumping up the Public Works budget on trees for a year?
Okay,
Right.
now I'm throwing something else in extra, which
Oh.
is that if there are going to be a couple of special specimen trees, they be planted during 2025 as advertised, come watch this wonderful tree be planted for the anniversary.
Yes. Okay. Let me see if I can tackle all of that. So yes, this is absolutely intended to be something special and above and beyond just the usual CPW planting of 80 to 100 trees that kind of happen and people may or may not notice them. So I've been meeting every couple of weeks with a group of volunteers. We're trying to suss out potential tree planting sites that will eventually be vetted by CPW and whatever contractor they would hire to carry out most of the planting work. To answer the maintenance question, it would be it would be planting and then a 2-year maintenance contract. And that's generally accepted practice for establishing new trees. There's been a lot of discussion about picking appropriate trees. I don't know if anyone was able to attend a talk at the library last Thursday night by Peter Deltredici of the Arnold Arboretum. Great turnout. We had probably 70 people there. A lot of really good discussion about what types of trees are appropriate to plant in public spaces, in urban spaces, what's going to survive climate change. So a lot of thought is going into kind of what are the most appropriate trees to plant. So far, our volunteer group has been kind of focusing on the village centers. So West Concord Village, 9 Acre Corner, and then the Thoreau Depot and Concord Center to identify planting sites. And now we're kind of starting to branch out from there. I went and walked around the high school with one of the other volunteers last Friday and looked at a lot of spaces there. There's a lot of potential for planting there. There's a lot of potential at the new middle school. So I think these are we want to accomplish, 2 goals of making these visible, but also of distributing them equally across town. So, and then to the visibility question, we have been thinking a lot about how that's going to happen. So all the tree planting, to try to maximize the amount of time we have to plant them, we would start in fall of 2024, continue in spring of 2025 and fall of 2025. Spring of 2025, what we talked about just last week was that's when we want to make the biggest public impact with these plantings, right around April 19th, and when a lot of other things are going on, so that we have some tree plantings that are public events. And obviously Arbor Day falls in there, and I know the Garden Club always does something like that. There's an article coming out, I think, in this week's Bridge. I was interviewed talking about the project, so that's going to be coming. We have a whole press plan, that'll be part of the communications around the 250th. One idea I had, when you drive around town and you see, if you're paying attention to trees, you notice that new trees go in and they have these green gator bags to help water them. And I suddenly thought the other day I was driving around and I was like, what if we got like custom made gator bags for the 250 trees? And so they would be immediately visible as you drive around town. Maybe they only make them in green, but we could get like decals to put on them or something. So we are really thinking about ways to make a splash with these trees. So it's not just going to be kind of business as usual. This is what CPW always does. We really want to, because the ultimate goal is not just to plant these trees and make this a symbolic gesture for 250 years into the future, and what the kind of legacy that we're leaving for future Concordians, but we also want to just raise awareness about tree planting and the importance of trees as both part of the community character, but also as a mitigation for impacts of climate change. So it has a lot of meaning, I think, in the minds of the people that are trying to put this together.
That's great.
Thanks so much, Krista. So I mean, generally, it seemed like the questions were, how do we distinguish this from sort of just a regular plumped up public works program that people might not otherwise notice? And some of the things you touched on were that you're going to be vetting particular sites, maybe focusing on sites that are or planting areas that are particularly important. You're looking at some sorts of designations so that people will be aware that this is part of these commemorative trees. Does anybody else have any further questions based upon that, or with one additional clarification?
I just have a comment.
Yeah, Nancy.
We have seen, I have seen a lot of the trees that DPW has been able to procure. And they are very, very, very good at selecting wonderful plant material. So I think you're not gonna see scrawny little saplings, right, Krista? I think
yeah,
they're gonna be
They
trees
typically
that-
plant 2.5 to 3 inch caliper,
Yeah,
so that's
thank
the
you.
diameter.
That's what I'm getting at. And they know how to procure wonderful plant material. That's all I
I wor-
wanted to say.
I worked with an arborist or my wife primarily did for a long time to find a memorial tree for a neighbor of mine who had passed. And we searched and searched, and we finally got a tree put in. And then I subsequently saw that Concord was planting the same species of tree, but a much nicer, healthier, larger version in
Yeah,
several
exactly.
places around my neighborhood. And
Exactly.
it was a little, it was heartening, but also like made me realize that I was, had done an inadequate job. All right. Thank you very much for your time, Krista.
I think Eve
no
has her
notes.
hand too.
Oh, I don't have it.
just wanted to say quickly that I didn't realize until you mentioned it, that there were so many volunteers on this particular committee, the 250, and that the thing at the library sounded fantastic. And I'm sorry I missed it. So I take back what I said about being with Paul. I'm not with Paul anymore. I'm super enthusiastic about planting trees, and I think we should fully fund this project.
Thank you.
What? What just happened?
Do you have anything to say for yourself?
I was for this project. I just didn't know whether it was open-ended or specific. I'm for this project.
Okay. All right.
I see John put his hand up too.
Oh, I was just gonna say, knowing that we have sufficient funds, it would be very hard to explain ourselves on this one if we didn't fund it.
Lots
Thanks,
of
John, for that comment. I mean, one thing that's for sure is about this project is it is timely, right? It's obviously commemorative to a particular date, and this is the cycle to fund it in, if ever. So, Krista, thank you very much for your time and jumping on with no notice.
Yeah, sorry, I should have just automatically thought to attend, but there's so many things going on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, so without further ado, do we with this one? I'd like to be able to just continue through. So do people feel that they're comfortable putting it in the fully funded bucket or the funding recommended bucket? Yeah,
Yep.
I'm seeing some thumbs up.
Can't get my screen.
So I'm with Eve, even though she's not with me.
Okay.
All right.
I love this project.
Okay.
Next.
Yeah. Next is we are to the Haywood Meadow Wall restoration. This is that little project that nobody will see because it is it's hardly visible from the street, but it's one of those little tiny pieces that, like I mentioned, it's one of the little beads on the necklace, I think, that make it will make Haywood Meadow and that part of town center so special. Was anybody assigned to this?
I was.
Yes,
And Ed.
Nancy. And Ed.
I think from my point of view, this is a very comprehensible project, and it also includes an element of safety, which I think is pretty obvious. And I'm very much in favor of this project.
I love that little park that's right there off of Lexington Road and Thoreau. I walk off in the Walden Woods, and if you go down Fairhaven Road all the way down to the open bay there's an old foundation. There was a huge house there, and it has a big wall, and I noticed it had exactly the same cap and the exactly same kind of river stones underneath it, but because it's been left alone, it was beautiful, and we let this wall go almost too far, but it sounds like they are ready to go ahead and do it. My only question is, I think they were thinking about removing the cap. I wasn't sure exactly what the plan is to restore it completely, or maybe come up with a different different style of wall there, but I hope they want to retain the original, the design.
Well, define original because the concrete was added later and they're talking about getting rid
yeah.
of it and taking it back to the earlier form of wall.
Oh,
Yeah, it's, I'm trying to find that. I'm not remembering about the wall, cap. Just a second.
the
No, it's not going
it's
away.
cement flats, almost like a pavement type of, cap.
It would almost be better to replace it with something else. I'm trying to find what they said. I
I'm
can't
pretty
find
sure Delia said that it would be like the other restored.
the
or
other restored
built
walls.
That
Yeah,
do not have the concrete on top in order to give
Yeah.
it more of the look of the Haywood Meadow in Revolutionary Days, which goes with the 220.
well, or even just to have a unified look. I'm not sure it would date back to then, but the unified look, I think, Sue, right, that
Yeah.
resonates with me.
Right, and I, for one, would be very sad if the town commemorated our 250th anniversary of the revolution by crushing the foot of some unfortunate person walking past that bit of wall. So it seems like a good project to me.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
they're trying to match the walls, but there is a reference to other mid-17th century walls in the area. Not sure about the date. But definitely I think the idea is to make it consistent.
Well, I will say, and probably some people on the committee remember this, that those Haywood Meadow walls, when they were, they because they've got to go with a bid that was the lowest bid under state procurement rules. When they originally built the wall, it didn't match the other on the other side of the meadow. They didn't match and it had to be redone. I think Delia, probably much more than any of us appreciate, is attuned to the consistency of masonry styles that are appropriate around the Haywood Meadow. As she's had dealt with a huge headache on that. So I would assume that's.
I appreciated the care in the color of stones because there is that unfortunate project, not in Concord, where they got nice historic stones that are totally the wrong color for Concord.
I could think of a place. It's interesting, the references to that it would remain an evocative link. Evocative link is sort of like the evocative landscape in the national park when you can't exactly restore it, but you evoke the feeling. So that's good enough for me.
Okay.
That wall is right next to the mill dam stream, I guess, that goes under Haywood Street there. And that there's a fence there, a wooden fence with granite posts, and it's always falling down. And Delia talked about they were probably going to do something about that fence, but I think it's not part of this project, but it's the whole area is kind of overgrown on the banks of the mill dam. Anyway, I think maybe they could expand the project a little bit to include a real fence that doesn't fall. The wooden things are not braced properly, and they always seem to be one or two of them missing. So I used to live right on Everett Street, so I
probably can't expand the project, right?
No, I know that.
Yeah, they certainly can't for this, but it sounds like, Ed, if you would consider resigning from the committee, that you would make quite the applicant for that that project.
I don't live there anymore, so
yeah.
I don't see it as much, but
it's
it's really a nice little park there. So
I think they're continuing to go after invasive species along there. So some of that overgrown stuff might be the good stuff, and probably plenty is invasive. And I know that's an ongoing concern.
Well, it's much cleaned up than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And about 3 or 4 years ago, they had a milkweed planting, experiment where they planted a bunch of milkweed, hoping to attract the monarch butterflies. And Having been there a lot, I only counted 1 or 2 butterflies a year. So maybe that's progress, but
Well,
anyway.
it's a terrible year for monarchs.
So a nice little park, and I think definitely we should do what we can for it.
Let's fund the wall.
Yes.
Fund the wall.
Okay, we've got, okay. So, and
Sure.
I think we're ready to put that there. Which brings us to
Can I
the,
just a comment on, at this point, it probably doesn't make a difference, but both H and I they're open space. There's not a recreation split on that. They're both open space categories. So when we,
yeah,
the-
and Anne, can you speak to that? Because I'm not sure where those designations are coming from. I hadn't paid attention to that on the
it's
applications.
from the application itself, I think.
Well, we discussed it, there were 3 basic 10% funding guarantees, and open space and recreation seem to be combined on that 10%.
But no, this is an open space application. As if you look at the application, I'm just saying we shouldn't just split it arbitrarily. This is
Yeah.
they're different categories.
Is this
I'm
a cut
totally-
and paste problem in creating the table? I wonder if it is.
Yeah,
I was using a table from last year, so I just
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
update the table.
yeah, and Paul, I'm totally with you. I think that we need to not be arbitrary in assigning this because, I mean, we do at a minimum want to make sure we're getting that 10% for each category, and just arbitrarily doing it when we're talking about a wall that has nothing to do with.
Yeah, no, the
Recreation.
other ones are correct. E is correct, F is correct, G is correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're not being arbitrary. It's just a minor computer file layout error that Anne will clean up.
Oh,
Okay.
no, I'm not worried about that. We're going to account later to see if we have 10% or 20%. I just want to make sure they're in the right categories.
Yeah,
So,
right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it's a good question whether the prison outreach project qualifies as recreation. We know that it's not historic preservation because it is on essentially on a recreation property. So I'll just table that for discussion. Meanwhile, do we have any representatives who were on the assigned to this as a project who want to take the lead in the discussion here?
Yeah, even I had it, and
Okay.
it was actually quite moving to be out there and see the site. And I think although I know that this is not to promote visitation on foot to the site, it's to promote information about the meaning of the site along the Ruth Freeman Rail Trail. So I think the site itself, the commemoration of those unnamed who died without family, the fact that so many will now come across the trail thanks to the bridge, I think it's worth funding.
Yeah.
It's
Me too.
So it's actually definitely recreation because it's on the Bruce Freeman Rail
Right.
Trail. It's not open space or anything else. And I know Anne's going to fix all of that, but I'll just put that there. In the presentation that we saw, all of our questions were answered. It was very well thought through, and I look forward to seeing more wayfinding and signage opportunities to get people to notice this thing. And I think that they're on their way to getting it done. So I don't think there's anything left open after our presentation and question session on that. And it was really fun to visit. I would say fund the cemetery kiosk.
I would just add to that, as somebody that tends to poke their nose around town, looking at different things. Over the past few years, I'd noticed this cemetery as in conjunction with having done the walking tours for the original Bruce Freeman funding and for the Giroux Park funding, and I'd gone over there and looked at it, and I noticed that around Memorial Day, some flags would show up on essentially unmarked graves. and that somebody was taking the care to do that, and stopping and walking and looking at that. And then just within the past few months, realizing that when they originally were proposing getting rid of the rotary, I looked at the plan that was the preferred plan that got through and was supposed to be funded for construction. They had a highway ramp going right through the middle of that cemetery. And it just made me realize that but for some thoughtful people here coming in and taking recognition of this, you know, nobody would be noticing these things. And 15 years ago, it could have been bulldozed, and presumably people disinterred and then bulldozed. But I think it's very worthwhile. And I appreciate the people that have put in so much effort to it. So I definitely put it in the category of being funded.
Gosh, I was all set to say, let's go ahead and fund it until you said that we should let the location of the bones of the honored dead disturb the lives of the living from having their time saved to go home and hug their children instead of waiting in traffic. But nevertheless, it's sorry, you pressed a button. It's not just a kiosk, though. It's also the ability of people to know what they're looking at and to be able to actually go look at it by standing not in the cemetery, but where they can see it. And I think that's worthwhile.
Thank you, Sue. And we'll get that rotary fixed one way or the other. Yeah. Okay. I don't think we've got any objections there. Now we come to this interesting request, which is the athletic fields for the Concord Middle School. Who was assigned to this one? If anybody on this call, Paul?
The recreation guy.
Yeah, recreation. Thank you.
I'm not sure what the interesting comment is, but I personally am really enthusiastic about this project. Why? They're very seldom the pure recreation projects come in front of us, like Emerson Field or Rydot Park, or fields where actually people can recreate and play on. You know, the other recreation pieces here, sure, they're open space, they're trails, passive recreation, but there's very few active recreation opportunities that we get to fund. And I know for a fact that the lack of the middle school fields because of the construction is really putting a dent in soccer programs and other programs. So these are really well used, heavily used fields, and they will be. The fact that they're alternate funding mechanisms, maybe that's what makes it interesting, but I think they're probably alternate funding mechanisms for some other things here. On its face value, this is a really important, worthwhile project. The question is, I don't know. Do we put this back in the bond, or do we fund in CPC? We certainly have the funds to do that. So I'm really supportive of this.
Yeah, and Paul, let me clarify, because my interesting comment, it was to your last point. My impression when the applicant originally came before us, sort of in the what does it mean to apply for the CPC, is they were doing this because they'd made the commitment at town meeting to seek additional funding sources, but they seemed really lukewarm, like that it was they were going through the motions. That said, for all the reasons that you said, I think a very worthwhile use of our money is investing in recreational fields at our school. These fields get used up, constantly, and it's a tremendous return on the investment. One of the things I just want to be thinking through is I think there will be the people at town meeting who think that this is a good thing that the school committee is seeking alternative funding sources, or alternatively, that this is the school getting funding beyond what they promised they would limit the project to. And I can't figure out which one of the two things it is. But
we heard a long time ago, and I guess maybe it was last town meeting, we heard, I know Diane heard, that the middle schools were going to come to us for complete funding of that, of those fields, over $1 million. And
yeah.
It took our breath away a little bit. So I think it was always their intent to come to us for some part of that funding. They pared it back. which I think was a good idea to do, but anyway.
Okay, yeah, I'm not, I don't disagree with any of those points. Nancy, you've got your hand up.
I'm sorry. My memory is that they were very clear when they came and presented. Now I may be wrong, so I'm sure I can be corrected here. I think they said they could fund it another way, and I was unconvinced about the need. So I don't have all those notes with me right now, but that's the one thing I would actually really want to probe is why CPC. I'm again thinking about what we might reserve for the future, but that's just a question. I think athletic fields are important, but I wonder because the people who are presenting seemed to say they had other alternatives and they were coming to us as a show to request a show of support. So
I had the same general sense.
Can I comment on that? Because I think I made the comment that there are other projects on here that have other funding sources. And in fact, you look at them and we're not fully funding any project, whether it's housing or whether it's any historical, there are other funding sources. It's just that that doesn't mean the project wouldn't proceed without our funding.
fair enough.
But I think that this other funding source, I don't want this to be a little red herring in this particular thing. Could they do it without our funding? Sure. Do we want to ask the other projects, could they do it without our funding? I'm not sure we want to do that.
It was volunteered is what struck me. It was volunteered a couple of times, as I recall, but it's a good fundable project. So it just doesn't rise to the top of my list in that full amount.
Okay, so Nancy, not at the top of your list. Good project, but not at the top of your list. Sue, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, well, when they first said they would make this request before I was a member of this committee, my immediate thought was this is a way for them to raise the school budget without raising the school budget. So
right.
For whatever that's worth. They said they could get the money from other sources, but I wonder what they mean. If the money would be rolled into the school bond, then to protect the taxpayers, we ought to fund it through the CPA in order to reduce the debt burden and avoid the interest. But if they could get it from some other resource, then should we not have them do that since they seem so lukewarm about it in the first place? On the other hand, the amount of money is so tiny relative to the school budget that in terms of what it did to the debt one way or another, it seems trivial. So I'm left without a strong sense one way or the other on this project.
The other funding source was the bond.
It was the bond. Okay,
Yeah.
well, then it seems like we should go along with the gesture of slightly reducing the burden on the taxpayers, even though it is negligible.
Well, and that goes, Sue, that goes to my point. It's like, is it a negative thing if we're supporting the schools this way, or is this viewed as we're facilitating a money grab by the schools? That's kind of my concern. I don't want to get involved in the controversy around there. But at the same
nevertheless,
time, I want to support the project.
Well, it's such a small amount either way that
Yeah.
it doesn't embroil us very deeply in any controversy. If it had been the entire sum, I would have much larger concerns.
Right. Let's go with Edward.
My comment when the presentation was made is that the school board really needs to up their PR, with the town, and the fight for the middle school, an increase in the budget really incentivized the opponents to taxes in the town and so forth. So I agree with Burton that they need to be more than lukewarm about wanting these funds. So. and I'm all for fun fields for kids, and I think that, it's a good thing. But the Concord at Play, to me, looking back on what happened with that, it would seem to be kind of a boondoggle that went awry. I mean, I look at the stairway they built down to the tennis courts. It only goes about 90% of the way. There's about a 10 or 15 foot gap at the end of the stairway. It sort of just ends on the little bank that you have to kind of climb down. It's just it was a boondoggle. I think they promised the town that they would fund all the fields, and it turned into some kind of I don't have any proof that there was money that went missing, or maybe money that wasn't raised, but it just didn't get sold very well on what they had to do with the high school, and now we're doing the same problem with the middle school.
Wait, I'm sorry. Are you referring to high school fields and issues that happened there?
Yeah, in other words, the school board has had their political problems, that kind of climaxed at the building of the high school, and now they resurrected this kind of ill will among people that don't have kids in the school district. I mean, if you listen to Henry Dane a little bit on the select board, he's really not very happy with how the budget is tilted so much towards the school.
Okay. Though I would point out, I think that most of the athletic facilities were done by CC at Play at the high school, which is distinct from the school committee here that's seeking that's the applicant here.
Well, true. I just I got the impression that we wanted this fancy high school. The state refused to fund it, so they came up with Concord at Play. And then when we went to the state for the middle school funding, they refused to give us any funding, which they usually do for most communities, because the state was mad at Concord for just wanting a fancy Newton South type of facility.
I'm sorry, could you clarify your comment? Are you opposed to this project because of some issue with budget?
No, I think this is important. This is an important project, and I fully support having fields. It's just that I feel the school board needs to up their PR. I'm just afraid we're going to be attacked for getting involved with the school boards. If it's just they're just trying to prove that they have gone out for outside funding. It's not, that's not a good reason for us to be giving the money. Is because we want the fields, and we want the school to appreciate what we're doing. Am I being too vague there?
Well, the town has voted for middle schools. That's behind us. It's going forward. So
yeah.
So how can we support that?
Well, I know. I just feel that the school board have to say, okay, we built all the schools that are brand new, and we should just back off on any building for 20 or 30 years and just make sure they take care of the schools. They don't let them, like I think of the new high school as the one that was built in 1960, and they tore that down.
So I think, Ed, if I may, sort of summarize. The concern is a little bit that the school budget, the school funding is caught up in larger town issues, and that maybe by being involved in this, we should be cognizant of the fact that we're either supporting additional school funding, or we are saving the tax dollars additional money, depending on how you look at it, in the school funding. But we should be cognizant of that. Yeah,
I think we just need to sell this project as a great, plus for the kids that are going to be going to middle school. It's well planned. It's just that the PR behind it is clouded by all this uproar about the middle school in the last couple of years. Yeah. We've certainly sat through enough town meeting on that. So, John, you've got your hand up.
Well, simply to reinforce I think the clearest argument for funding this, which is that we need the fields. we need fields, the middle school students need fields, and others will use the fields outside of school hours.
That's succinct. Yeah. Okay. Then let us, looking at the time, we are an hour and 41 minutes into our meeting. Do we have a consensus, or I should say unanimity, on whether the middle school athletic field should be in a funding recommendation category or in the further discussion category? And further discussion we come back at a subsequent meeting on.
I'm in further discussion.
You're in further discussion, Nancy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Based on what their presentation was.
Okay.
I need to
Are
look
you
back.
asking for a vote on this, or what are you asking for?
I'm not asking for a vote. I mean, this is just the first general categorization, and in my view, if somebody wants to table it for further discussion, let's table it in the interest of just getting through the first pass. Nothing here that we're doing is definitive. To reiterate, if something has been put in the category of fully funded and somebody wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks, oh gosh, the RESO office, we should reconsider, we can pull it back out at the next meeting. I just want to begin a first categorization. So for that purposes, since Nancy wants to have further discussion, I'd say let's put that in bucket 2.
Am I the only one? Am I the
It would
only?
be, yeah, I think you may be in a small group, because I would certainly ask, what do you need to know more?
I need to know why the presentation said it doesn't matter if we get this funding, we can fund it elsewhere.
I don't think, did Lori Hunter say that? She
I
didn't
believe it was, that's what I want to clarify.
well, we should look at the video or ask Lori to come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Nancy, I also was left with the impression that they were doing it not because they necessarily needed the funding from us, but because they had made a commitment at town meeting that they would seek additional funds.
Yeah.
And I also had that impression, and whether it was whether given sort of a, you know, whether they would restate that as no, we would really prefer to get it from you or not, it would be interesting to hear.
Yeah.
I made the comment that the percentage of this request was so minuscule. I think it was like 1.2% of the actual total budget, whereas the amount we were giving, and this is when we were thinking we had about $2 million, is really a 12% of our budget. So I just was saying, you know, it's more important to us than it is what it seemed to be to the school board. I mean, to the school presenter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, but I think it's 20% of the field budget, not the overall school. You know,
Right.
the athletic fields themselves are 1.1 million. So this is a 20% of that piece. That's what we ought to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about the addition that they had added on, you know, the special town meeting that required additional funding for the whole project. So.
Right, the whole project, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm for it. I mean, I agree with Nancy that they need to do a better job, but I wouldn't stand in the way of having them get this money.
Well, the other thing is we don't need to fund it at that level. It's not insignificant to CPC, I don't think. So that's all. I'll look at the recording. I will try to figure that out too.
Well, I'll say you're probably not going to hit your 10% on recreation without this project. So.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Let's consider that. So let's assume we fund out at, let's say, 2 million. Where are we on recreation thereabouts? We've got
783,300.
Well, that was the number when we had a whole bunch of projects that were sort of split. I'm seeing Concord Prison Outreach 45,000. What else do we have that's actually recreation?
Yeah, 15,000 in G, and you have 100,000 in E. If you split that 50-50, so
What do you-
100,
Okay,
130.
so yeah,
Yeah,
Paul's probably right. We're not not gonna be at 10%.
10
But that doesn't mean we have to fund, to be clear, that doesn't mean we have to fund the athletic fields. We could do a designated reserve for recreation.
Yeah.
But it does merit consideration for sure.
Well, I'm gonna display my ignorance. Is there a floor for recreation or is it just for open space?
I think, isn't it 10% per category and
No, the
and
one-
recreate?
I
The
don't
one
think
that was
it's for
added
every,
later has no floor. Isn't that recreation?
I don't think recreation has a floor.
I think the idea was that nobody wants to fund housing and, but everybody wants to fund recreation because it's for every individual to enjoy recreating. So who needed a floor? That's just my assumption. I don't know if that's why.
I just
Uh,
remember
and-
only 3 categories.
And do you have insight on this?
Yes, when it was first created, when the Community Preservation Act first passed, there were only 3 categories, and it was, housing, historic preservation, and open space. And then recreation was only added later. So the 3 categories that must be funded are the original 3. So there is no floor for recreation, as you're saying.
There is no floor.
There is no floor, correct, for
Even
recreation.
now. Okay,
Mhm.
yeah, that's what I thought.
But I do, well, it hasn't been, it's been our practice to look at all 4 categories since I've been sitting here. Maybe it's
Well-
not the law, but it's been our practice.
Well, then
Look,
we don't need.
I think we should table that part of the discussion and let's, Bert, if I can say, let's mull this over, let's look at the video. And then we can revisit at the next meeting and take a vote.
Yeah, I think that's where we are, is essentially there's some further consideration on this one. And let's move on to category L. So this is Concord Art Association Historic Structure Preservation, 37 Lexington Road. And I want to say, Nancy, was this you?
Yeah, and Ed,
Okay.
I think this is a well-developed project, and to other people's point, other funding sources are there. I'm having some trouble understanding the whole scope of it and how it fits together. It's a very complex project. So I know that there's people here who may know more about that. I think it's a good project. There's some removal of historic fabric, but I think it doesn't rise to a major concern. So I don't know what Ed thinks.
I'm completely in favor of this project. I think they were well organized with their presentation. I especially like the fact that he talked about the historic value of the skylight, that the first woman MIT architect designed it, and they made, they also made us look at a bathroom which was being held up by, looked like, bubble gum and popsicle sticks. But so the need is right there, and I think what they've done is they took this money that we were going to get for doing a lot of smaller projects, where the big project that they're raising a couple of $1 million for is a new classroom that's going to be added in the back. So I think that we were given the preservation aspects of it, and the education part that they're going to provide for the town will come from their own fundraising. They're doing a lot of good, they're very good at fundraising.
And very far along.
Yeah. And it's something that they want to do right away. There's some leakage. I guess there's a chimney that really needs to be either removed or repointed or something like that. I mean, there were lots of little things they wanted to do, and I think all of them will help in the preservation. And there's a great history of the Art Association going back into the 1920s.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for those comments, Nancy and Edward. Eve, you've raised your hand first, I think.
Yeah, I just want to say that I am very much in favor of this project. I think that the applicant responded with agility between our site visit and our presentation, where they took very seriously our questions during the site visit, and then in presentation really were very specific about what we were supposed to be funding. And I don't have it in front of me, but there's one particular page of Halsey Platt's budget that lays out what we're going to be doing, except for the sprinkler system, which is sort of based on an estimate from the architect. So I was really impressed with their, turnabout there and getting really specific on the project. This is one of those projects where I have a procedural question, and I did eyeball the manual that I was directed to at the beginning of this meeting, and everything that's in the manual is also in our plan here. So they need to spend a lot of that money now, like before they'll get funding. So how does that work? Are they allowed to ask for funding and then like shuffle their money to, do you know what I mean? Like there's
I know exactly what you mean. And that's the question, Paul, I originally raised in the context of 51 Walden. Can the funding be used for essentially invoices that are come due and payable prior to the town meeting, prior to the next funding cycle that we're looking at here?
And I just want to qualify that by saying that I would not want us to be responsible for somebody falling through that bathroom floor because our funding didn't get there in time for them to fix it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You mean you wouldn't want to say, hey, you can't spend the money now because you've got to wait to do the project until we go through this procedural stuff that gets you the funding next summer. I mean, that's a good point, but I think this is a question that hangs over. I mean, in terms of the eligibility questions we have this year, of which there's always one or two, but the eligibility questions are in the same bucket. That's the answer we need. In terms of, can we fund a project that potentially the expenses are incurred and invoiced prior to our town meeting vote? And I'm guessing you're out there in the ether listening, but
Yes,
can you confirm?
Yes.
Okay.
I will follow up again and try to find
Okay.
it for you.
Thanks. Okay.
Poor Anne.
I don't think we need to hold any real question about whether we're going to fund this or not. It's just a matter of how they're going to be able to spend it, or when they're going to be able to spend it.
Well, let's get through to the other. We've got some other committee members with their hands raised. If anybody else has any other concerns, Eve, I feel like, did I cut you off?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Oh, you're good, Paul.
Well, I do have a question on funding. I mean, apropos of our previous discussion, could this project proceed without our funding? It's clear to me that it could, because this is a $2.5 million project, and they've carved out $173,000 for things that are appropriate for CPC. So I just want to pick up on a previous discussion about projects that could proceed without our funding, and this is a very small part of the whole project. So, if we were pressed for funds, which I'm not sure we would be, with this one we might want to put aside.
Okay.
I'm pointing to some equivalence with our previous discussion about other project funding sources, right? I'm being very transparent about what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So, Paul, if I may, I mean, I think in the past, historically, we've actually looked to applicants. Are you bringing a multiplier to the table? It's been a good thing if they have other funding sources, right?
Sure.
We would much prefer a project where we say putting some CPC money on the table is going to spur, let's say, some donors who will contribute in a like amount. I think the question with respect to the middle school is whether the school is applying for CPC funding, not because they need to displaces another funding source or they really need our funding, but because it was more just driven by a commitment they made at town meeting, and it was half-hearted. I mean, I think it's a little bit different, and I think that it's actually a valuable thing if there's additional funding that's coming to or additional funding sources. So and to me, this has a good parallel in the funding that we did, which was for the historic preservation element of the Concord Museum, which has pockets as deep as anybody in town. And they were bringing $20 million or $15 million to the table, and we were contributing $60,000. Yep. Sue.
Yes, so since I was just looking at the procedural manual, I note that item P says the CPC will generally not recommend appropriating CPC funds for prior expenses unless it's for acquisition of land. So that seems kind of problematical. And so it was good that they clarified things a lot when they came back to us later about what we would pay for and what we would not. But or what they were asking for and what they were not. But I wonder if there's something that our committee can do for the future, because not just this one, but a couple of proposals we got this year, it seemed like they had a gigantic project and they flung endless pages of information at us, most of which were completely irrelevant, and it was very difficult to tell, to wade through it all in order to find out what they were actually asking for and how it was relevant to us. So I'm just
Well,
saying.
I will say a little bit that this is to that. This is nobody's a professional at this. We're all the applicants, like especially that are not town applicants, are amateurs in the good sense, and so they want to provide as much information as they can. I do regret that when I picked up the package, I heard the sounds of trees falling, but I was, I can't hold it against them for being providing perhaps too much information. Okay.
I wonder if we could just put this in the fully funded with an asterisk and just get an answer to the question about P and Ann and everything, and come back around to it.
I would be in favor of that. Is anybody object to that approach?
No.
I'm unclear. What are we asking for?
For the Concord Art Association, whether we are in favor of funding the full amount of 173, but with an asterisk, and Eve, do you want to clarify the additional items
Yes.
we want?
The asterisk is to just double check that they are either going to hold off on the bathroom renovation until they get funding, or if it's okay if they get started with that and borrow from Paul to pay Peter or whatever, because they have a much larger project going on. I just want to make sure that there's some wiggle room in our process to allow for that bathroom project to happen sooner than next year this time. But if it has to wait, maybe it has to wait. It's really an irrelevant question. I still think we should fund the whole project.
It's relevant in part so that we're consistent, because John, and this goes to what can we fund essentially things that have been expenses that have been previously incurred, which is very relevant for 51 Walden. And I think we need to be consistent.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm in favor of the asterisk there with the open question we have to Ann. And on that note is probably, let's go to 51 Walden. I'm going to say we have the same asterisk.
Can I just, I just want to be very clear that I'm not saying that they've already spent money. I'm not saying that Concord Art has already spent money on this. Okay.
Yeah, but the question is the timing of the appropriation versus the expense and incurrence. Yeah. Okay. So, and 51 Walden.
So I am disqualifying myself and closing my video.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you pointing that out. And so was anybody in attendance tonight, the representative for 51 Walden?
I was.
Hey, Nancy. Okay.
I think I'm still, I still need to look at that more carefully, just in terms of what qualifies as regular maintenance versus what's fundable with CPC.
Yeah.
It may or may not be an issue. I'm not fully decided about that. But surely when two things bothered me, and I also have to look back at what some of the additional information was, but the initial painting estimate I thought was quite low. And given the shape of that building and its paint job, I'm suspecting that they might find other things that are not just painting, but are actually some repair items. And I'm just not clear about that in my mind totally.
And part of that is maybe if the painting you could get done for that job, which to me seemed like it was 20% of what it would actually cost. That sounds like a paint job, not a historic preservation job.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
Right.
There was something similar for the old manse, but they were able to provide evidence that there were issues beyond just scraping and painting. There was sill repair, there was all kinds of window stuff, and there were other places where there was rotted material.
And yeah, and so we got through that, but in part because the expense reflected those rehabilitation steps rather than what I would worry about. I mean, you look at that they're just putting they're spraying paint on. I mean, for that dollar, there, it's for that price, I've got to imagine it's sprayed on top of a surface that hasn't been restored.
Well, the surface prep, if my memory is totally correct, the surface prep seemed fine. It was careful scraping and sanding, as I recall. But I don't know about the spray. That's got to be cheaper.
Well, I just to make that assumption because I think their price for painting was
very low.
It was less than I paid to paint a house 15
Yeah.
years ago that was a quarter the size of that building. So
my only question on that.
So Anne, I think, well, so were there independent concerns about funding? Is anybody not in favor of funding 51 Walden, subject to getting additional information both on the timing of the expense incurred, which is the same question we had for category L, as well as whether this type of painting or the work falls within the allowable expenses?
Well, to what degree do we also consider the reliability of the cost estimate?
Well, ultimately, we're looking at I mean, we've looked at sort of the financial wherewithal and the sophistication of the applicant before in different projects. If we think that we're giving money to somebody that's and this is the case when we're talking about non-town projects, right? When we're giving money to somebody that we think they're not sophisticated in the way they're going about this, then that is certainly relevant to our deliberation. That's probably not quite the case here, but I look at the estimate and to me it speaks to whether is this rehab or is this sprucing things up.
Maintenance, yeah, regular maintenance. I think the representative responded to that, and I'm sorry, I don't have it at the tip of my tongue.
I believe they said they had used the same contractor before.
Yes, that's my recollection as well, and I just don't remember how much more was explained. But that's my outstanding little question. So I think they need it. They do need it.
Well, Holly, should we ask her?
I think she responded. Does anybody remember? I can look at all my notes, but I don't have that note right on.
Nancy, Holly is here on the Zoom.
Oh, excellent. Oh,
I just have before Holly answers, I just want to ask the committee for some history. If we've ever sent an applicant back to come back with a higher application amount to cover more work to be done. Have we done that before? Like, why don't you ask us for some more money? Kind of a thing.
We have asked applicants in the past to take some money now to come up with a preservation plan and come back to us in the future with the budget for the actual work, right? So when we thought that somebody came to us, I believe this was the Masons. They came to us and said, all right, we want to do the roof, we want to do the walls, and we had a lot of reservations generally about the sophistication of the proposal. I'll say that. And so we said, go back, get a preservation plan, and then come back to us for additional funding.
Correct.
Okay, that's probably going to make it too late for them, though.
For you're talking about specifically 51 Walden.
Yeah, because of the state of the paint job.
And 51 Walden is not the Masons, right? I mean, the Masons were, they were sort of new at the whole thing. And Holly, I certainly wouldn't characterize you guys as new to this process. So it's maybe a slightly different set of considerations. So Holly, I don't know when you joined, but the general questions were, we've got what we're doing tonight is we're dividing applications into sort of two rough cuts categories. One of which is let's fully fund and we don't need a lot more further discussion, or let's have some further discussion. And we're identifying particular issues in that second category, things we might want to look at. With respect to your application, we're wondering two things. One of which is our ability to fund spending that might occur prior to a town meeting vote to approve the and distribution of the funds. And second of all, the scope of the work, because as I think you know probably really well, it needs to be preservation work. It can't be general maintenance work. And so we were wondering about the paint job. So maybe focus on those two points.
Okay, I would like to clarify, Anne sent me, and I also have a copy of the general selection criteria. Page 33 states that the CPC will generally not recommend that town meeting appropriate CPC funds for expenses occurred by a project prior to the CPC receiving an application for the project. Not prior to town meeting or not prior to the July 1 date, but prior to receiving the application. So the only expenses that we had incurred prior to receiving the application was a deposit to the LPC Anderson HVAC company, which we made back in March so they could order the equipment, which is over 12 months out. So the equipment's not coming till the spring at best. And this is Mitsubishi, I guess it's coming from Japan. So they really strongly recommended if we ever wanted to see an HVAC system in there anytime soon, we needed to order the equipment, and they would not order it without our paying upfront for the equipment. We had a grant from the Mass Cultural Facilities Fund that covered that payment. So that's why we were able to go ahead and make that payment. So that payment is not, and obviously the amount of money we're asking for is, something that's under half of our total budget. We do fundraising all the time. So I think the wording here, prior receiving an application, everything that is being done or may need to be done, there was some roofing done, that happened after the submittal of the application. So hopefully that clears up that. And that's not part of the land acquisition. That's just that's the first sentence in that paragraph. So I think that, Concord Art and 51 Walden certainly qualify in terms of our need for money for things that we are doing after submitting the application, and things that we have to do. The roof, we couldn't wait till till town meeting because we're going through the winter, and so that had to be done, prior to the winter, and was just done in the last few weeks. The other issue is the painting estimate. Carol Whalen, the executive director, went back to the painting company that she has used all along. They're very well aware of the standards. The building is on the National Register. They are very aware of the standards. And they assured her that their methodology, and I think she forwarded to the committee the methodology that they use, and it is a hand scraping. It's not, there is no power sanding going on. It's careful work on the wood. They will replace shingles and restore them to the kind of shingles that they are. There is some significant trim work. Obviously, these painting budgets do not include all the woodworking that you end up needing to do, nor did our roofing budget. Actually doubled by the time they got up and did the proper flashing and were able to patch new leaks that had appeared. So, I'm sorry to see a budget without a 50% contingency in it, because I know that's almost inevitable. But this is the number that the painter gave us. I guess what we probably should have in there is a carpentry contingency for all of the repair work that will be discovered in the course. Once they scrape a shingle and it falls off in their hand, then we have a new job. So so that I think you're right. But I think the painting is their budget, and she's used them for years, and has been very happy with their work. So they may do it partly. Sometimes, you get companies that just like working in particular areas, and it's kind of a little bit of pro bono. I don't know that that's the case here, but that is their number.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you for that additional information, Holly. Does anybody on the committee have any questions for Holly?
No, that recalls what I was trying to recall, so that's great.
And the only comment I would make, Holly, is, and I really appreciate you pointing out, our own rules say the timing must precede the application, or it must be antecedent to the application. But I guess, Anne, I would point out, I still have the question to make sure that those rules conform to the statute, right? That we can fund something that the funding precedes the town meeting vote. The expense precedes the town meeting vote, as long as it is antecedent to the application. Eve, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the request from the applicant for 195 is well under the contract price for the HVAC system. And that the HVAC system is serving the purpose of helping to preserve this historical building. And so regardless of whether painting is too small an amount, I think that we could probably fund just a larger portion of the HVAC and fully fund the applicant.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I also think that, in all of these, we know we will ultimately be going to the bank for a loan. That's never been a question. That's our only recourse, but for funding all of this. But if we have underestimated to some degree, it's sort of our risk, and that painting number just is what it is. So
yeah.
It seems to be oh, are you there? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I'll be very quick. I know we're talking about paint and roof repairs and this sort of thing, but I think our essential mission is preservation of the Concord players.
Yeah. And there's an incredibly funny show on right now.
Okay, well, on that note, and thank you for the reminder of what this is all about. And I think if you want to pull back up our list of applications on the screen, that would be great. All right. So given this, can I ask for a sense of the committee on the funding here, and whether we need additional information, whether we sort of have made up a third category, which is yes, let's fund, but with an asterisk, versus let's have further discussions, or let's fund. Anybody want to take that one?
Do you want show of hands?
Sure. Let's do it that way. Fund. I see it. Okay. I'm going to go in with the fund with an asterisk because I still have this question on the timing of the funding.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it should be the same as whatever we're doing with the Concord art. And
Yeah.
I'm actually leaning toward just taking the asterisks off both of those. But it is an interesting, your question, Burton, is important and needs an answer. I'm not sure that it's going to affect whether we fund these or not. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
No.
Okay.
Next.
So
Next.
okay.
The next is $50,000. This is for the survey of reported pre-1775 structures in town. This was Anne's project, on which she was the applicant. Nancy, was this one of yours? I always
that's
just think of
fine.
No.
this is yours, Eve.
This is me and Sarah. Yeah. And this is, I think, a super fantastic project to fund, particularly because of the emphasis toward discovering alternate cultural historical references in town, which Anne made clear in her presentation. And I think that all of our questions were answered in the presentation, and that it's, it's a very good application, the way it's presented in paper. And so I was just blown away that there might be 90 or even more pre-1775 structures. And I would, I'm fascinated to find out what the results are of this study myself. So for me personally, I say we should fund this thing.
Okay. Anybody else have any input on it?
CHC did support it, obviously.
Thank you for noting that. When you said CHDC,
No,
CHC.
CHC. Okay.
I thought our chair was here, but maybe he didn't. He wasn't.
Oh, the chair of CHC. Okay. Any other comments? Does anybody object to putting this into the funding recommended category? No objection heard, and we're ready to put that into that category and move on to the archives. I don't recollect whether I was on this one, but I was particularly fond of this project.
Sue and Sarah.
Sarah and Sue.
Sarah and Sue. Okay. Sarah and Sue, Sue, you've got the floor in the absence of Sarah.
Well, I think it's a great little project. They're hardly asking for anything, and it couldn't possibly be more timely. Well, it could have been more timely if they'd done it last year, but other than that.
Okay. We were preserving other documents last year. But point taken. I'm told there will be other documents that will be even a year older next year for preservation. Is any discussion merited on this application? Okay. As I mentioned, I am in favor of this. Does anybody object to putting this in the category of funding recommended?
No.
No
Very good.
objection.
Okay, Robin's house. I would be interested, Nancy, in hearing from you on where things shook out on your views on some of the preservation measures that are recommended here, specifically the
Some of
new
the
site.
odd things.
Well, probably the thing that was most striking was the storm windows, but also just the I think it was the what's the word I'm looking for? Replacing the trim with
Replacement of that
plastic.
corner board and
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Yeah. I spoke at length with their historical architect and looked again at the rehabilitation standards, the secretary standards for rehabilitation. And while I might not do some of these things, and maybe we might not, they do fall squarely within what's allowed in the rehabilitation category of the Secretary of the Interior standards.
Okay.
So I think it's there's very little left of the original house on the interior and the exterior, but that's that's another thing. The windows were reproduced, so and a lot of the exterior is not original anymore. So then we don't need to worry about them taking out original fabric or historic fabric in order to do this. And storm windows can be removed. They're reversible. So that's another thing. So I think it's fine from that perspective.
Okay.
I apologize for my wireless or my Wi-Fi failing me when I was supposed to speak about this last meeting, but I think this is always been a great project for the town to do. It was wonderful when they moved the whole town, almost not the whole town, but quite a few people walked that house all the way to the national park. I think probably there's much more that can be done or will be needed to be done in the future, but I think working with the Robbins House people is fine. I was slightly confused about what happened to the Drinking Gourd Society, but it was explained that the Robbins House is now has taken over their non-status, their nonprofit status. So I'm 100% for doing what they want. And thinking we'll probably see other things. I noticed that they did raise $107,000 in an outside solicitation, so that their income, put it that way, was $107,000. So I think they're on the right path. It's just I think there's a lot that has to be done. The roof looks pretty terrible, and they didn't really talk about that so much. So anyway, I'm 100% for this project.
No, I agree. It has an important place in Concord's history and now an important place where it has very accessible to the public during the coming celebrations. It's going to see a lot of people, and these are small repairs with a small price.
Yeah.
Fund it.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, I'm in agreement. And sorry, I've been a bit distracted. I had to get a contract signed in India really quickly right there. Now I'm done with that. Now let's move on to the Scout House, the Scout House floor replacement project. Who on this project? Who on this committee had
Sue and
that
I.
project? All right, Sue and Nancy.
Go ahead, Sue.
Well, I feel like I'm biased since I've danced on that floor. I mean, it's one of the projects that's the floor is really falling apart and it needs to be done immediately. It's not a matter of postponing it for a year or not. Nobody else's IRS determination letter listed an expiration date, but theirs did. And did they clear that up? Because I really think that it's necessary to dot that I and cross that T. But other than that, it seems like it checks all the boxes and we should go ahead and fund it.
Yeah, I think it's,
Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
They did send the ST2 form from the state, which confirms their nonprofit status.
Very good.
Sue, thank you for noticing that. I noticed it, but then said, oh, well, I'm sure they must have it updated. I think I agree. And Sue has firsthand experience of that floor. And I think we all were able to see the splintering, and there's only one way that's going. And it seems that they have an excellent contractor in mind. And so I'm in favor of that. I think it's a great project, and what a wonderful resource the Scout House is.
Let's fund it.
Okay, doke.
I just would comment, we sometimes ask about, whether different groups in the community will benefit from these improvements that applicants that are not town sponsored. And here we have an organization that literally their floor is wearing through because they have so many different community groups coming through and using their facility. I haven't spent time there, but I certainly did spend a lot of time there doing the Cub Scout the car races when my son was younger. Okay.
Hey,
that brings us to the cemetery metal structures easement, or assessment, excuse me, for 22,500. Paul.
Yeah, I have that with Sarah. I don't have any direct experience in the cemetery, so I haven't danced in it. But it's a very worthwhile project. I think Rod always presents really well, very detailed description of the project. CPC is invested in the cemetery preservation, walls, stonework, and a lot of these structures, metal structures, are in poor shape. And so I think this is the not the repair, this is just the prioritization and the feasibility. So I think this is a necessary project, very worthwhile funding it. We will see another application next year to actually do the work.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm always struck by is when we visit, and I will confess that I haven't spent the time that all Concordians should probably be spending in this cemetery, that just the number of visitors clearly from out of town who are coming to Concord to look at the cemetery, and that it's such a valuable draw to the town of Concord. I find it interesting. Makes parking hard in the cemetery, but it's a good thing.
Lots of people.
Yeah. Nancy.
I would like to say that their presentations are always very well structured and very clear, and they have a real understanding, I believe, of the Secretary of the Interior standards for how you treat these historic structures and landscapes. I really appreciate that.
I feel like we're lucky with who they have there, sort of her time involved and her approach for sure.
Very good. Okay.
So does anybody object to putting this in the funding recommended category?
Fund the cemetery.
Fund the cemetery, Eve says. Anybody object?
No.
Okay. Which I think that's a run. If this is a live spreadsheet with a sum, we're at 640,000. The reason we're substantially below the funding amount is, I think, probably because of all those housing amounts, or the asterisks. And were those not in the total? I presume they are.
No, they probably are. They're probably not sensed as dollar figures.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think the spreadsheet would pick up.
Okay. They're not as dollar figures.
Also, please fund the administration cost too.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. What we didn't mean to skip over the last thing. All in favor of funding the administration costs as we have in all prior years?
Well,
Let's
obviously
pay
I'm
in.
against it.
Okay. All right. So,
Good.
Ann, please add that to the total there. And it looks like if we could just go back up to the top and we can do a quick refresh through here. Sensitive, it's 9:30. We've been on this call for 2.5 hours. I think we've done the lion's share of our deliberation here tonight. But it would be good to know.
Hey, Bert, just a question on the schools. Should that be a 250 of an asterisk or just a blank on the fields?
Well, so the schools was a one funding with a one project where we said we need further discussion, but I don't understand how that really differs from the other ones we had questions on, which were asterisks. So let's treat it all as one, right? So we've got the ones, let's consider it the ones we put an asterisk next to are the ones we have some further questions on. And this, I think the school is like that. It's not, it's different if at all by a matter of degree from the other categories that were like that. Paul.
So there's 3, right?
Right.
There's
At
3.
least 3. I think there were maybe 1 or 2 above.
Hillcrest,
Oh, Hillcrest.
historic, Concord Art, 51.
Yep. There we go. 4.
I meant 4. Okay.
Should we
And then
just
we've
add
got
the Concord Housing Trust in as well?
No.
Not yet?
Well, I think
Oh, you
just
mean
the
to
rough
fund?
total, we probably should put the housing trust in and take out the other 2. It may not end up like that, but just
Probably will.
we're kind of ballparking it here, right?
Yeah, that's right, Paul. I think that makes sense.
I mean, we'll know about the housing authority's application to the trust in another week. There is a question about the CHDC's acceptance of their taking over the trust taking over their portion.
Yeah. So
what I heard was they were going to vote. They were going to get the application in December, so that puts them kind of close to the deadline.
Actually, I think they said they were going to vote on it on next Tuesday. Right. And we would know about it by December.
Yeah.
Our next meeting after that is December.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So where that leaves us is the total amount, if we funded, if we answered all the questions that we had satisfactorily, we are at just under $1.9 million of funding. And also assuming that we had final resolution on the synthesis of the various housing applications. I think would be good to do a check at this point in terms of where we are in terms of our commitments to each required category. And do you have is it that easy to ascertain? So if, let's say we're at 1.9, we need at least $190,000 in funding from each of these each of the initial 3 categories. And so that's, got some spreadsheet errors, but we could probably eyeball it pretty easily. Right. So we need.
Hey, Burton, I'd like to just check with Diane on, it is true CPA wanted, I guess, required 3 categories, but we've always looked at the 4 categories.
Sure.
We ignored recreation and said it's okay to do it at 0. Well, we've set a floor on all of these categories. So I don't know what that floor should be, but we ought to be compiling. We ought to be compiling them.
Yeah. I don't think we had that as a policy.
I think it's more of a best practices to conclude, recreation.
I think what would be informative of this is, well, first of all, I want to go back and look at our guidance document, which whatever the title of that was called. Look, and I think it would also, Paul, be informative to look at Diane's presentations from the last 2 years in terms of how she breaks out the allocation of funding by category.
She breaks out 4 categories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then whether or not there's a hard requirement under the law, based upon our practice or based upon our senses, whether we can have the discussion as to whether even absent a 10% requirement for recreation or prior practice, whether we want to establish that. I think that's worthy of discussion for sure.
No, I think there is no legal requirement. It is 3 categories. It's been our practice to report 4 categories.
Well.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's correct.
Well, that's what we reported.
That's what we need to look at.
Well, but there's a difference between reporting them and requiring a floor.
Requiring them, absolutely different. You can look at what you allocated in different categories, but that's not to say that you've established a firm policy to do it all the time.
Well, then I think we need to have a discussion whether, recreation is a viable category that we have to fund.
I think that depends on what the recreation projects are.
I think we should
It's
have
one
a
of the
consensus
categories in
about-
CPA, right? Okay, I don't want to debate that anymore here. Just, it's a little strange.
It's more flexible.
Eve, yes.
This goes back to one of our subject from our September meeting, which was whether applicants should be in the 2 categories, open space and recreation. We sort of briefly touched about that, and then we decided we were going to leave it that way, even though it causes problems like around now when we're trying to figure out what's open space and what's recreation. And to that end, my understanding that the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail was recreation, not open space. And if that's the case, then why aren't all trails recreation and not open space, which would include the Assabet River Bridge and the Hillcrest Conservation Land Steps replacement? Wouldn't those also be just like the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and categorized only as recreation, not as open space? And then finally, I know I'm just monologuing here, but the White Pond APOD program, which cleans the water, we would be doing that regardless of whether we would be swimming in that water or not. So I would say that would actually be open space and not recreation. So those are my recommendations for the actual categorization of these programs when it comes to determining the 10% or whatever percent that we're thinking about.
I don't know. I would say that cleaning the water in White Pond enhances the recreation as well as enhancing the open space, whereas your point is well taken that adding trails to open space does not enhance its value as open space. It enhances its value as recreation.
That's why they were split.
If I may, I would suggest we go and take a look at how the categories are defined by the law. In my mind, I think of open space as acquisition of lands, as preservation of open space. Recreation as being, improvements that are dedicated, to facilitate human activities. But let's
need to look at the definition, because recreation specifically has acquisition of the land for recreation. So the acquisition.
Okay, so that's an acquisition too. Yeah. So I mean, these things should be pretty clear when we look at the law. I think that we get into these discussions and just bring sort of a common sense or layperson's understanding of these things. But I think if we look at it, it should help clarify. I also think we frankly have had the practice in the past of saying this feels a little open spacey, this feels a little recreationally, let's split it down the middle. But to the points Paul has raised, I think we need to be a little more precise about that.
I love that. I love the precision. Let's go for it.
Yeah, I think we should. The application itself has 4 boxes, and so the applicant checks 1 box or 2 boxes. If you look at the applications, that's how they should be in the spreadsheet. Whether we want to reclassify them after that, but it's the applicant who's made the decision thus far.
I understand that, Paul. I was just trying to make it clearer so that we could do our tallies at the end more easily. But it's becoming more and more clear that the open space, the only project we really have that's open space then is the trees, and everything else is recreation because they're not acquisition of land. But we could discuss that next time. I don't mean to drag our meeting to the 10 o'clock time period for this. Let's do it later.
Yeah, Burton's right. We've always been very fluid on this. So if we're moving into precision, we should discuss it.
Well, and part of that has been we've never been close to the 10% dead. I don't think we've ever cut it close where we need to really sharpen our pencils and be more precise. We've always been 20, 30% in each category. Okay, I'm just thinking towards our objectives and whether. So I think we made, first of all, very good progress. I think we have some open questions and some things we need to track down with a subset of, I think, 4 applicants, could get some additional input. I think that out of we had a total of, was it 19 applications or something around there? I think we're down to really just considering those last 4. Plus a somewhat further discussion on the housing applications based upon the information we'll have coming out of their Tuesday meeting. I frankly don't think we need a meeting on Thanksgiving week, and I would suggest that we can get through in a couple of hours in the first week of December, and we should be good to go from there. Is everybody in agreement? I saw some thumbs up.
Yes, yes.
That would be great.
2 thumbs up.
I am traveling next week for the whole week. Is there anything, before I sort of move on to additional business, is there anything else that anybody wanted to add to this discussion?
No.
Okay, and I'm just pulling up.
Eve and Ed.
All right, Ed, Bert,
yep.
this is,
Yes, please.
just before
I
you
just
got
think-
on, go ahead, Dave.
I just think we should come to total consensus about this issue, about the 3 versus 4 categories. I think we all should agree, or else we just should go to what we've been doing.
But maybe we could do that not at
But not
9:40
tonight.
tonight.
Not
Yeah,
tonight.
we could do that on the 12th.
Another time, but
The
we-
4th, December
Yeah.
4th.
I don't think we should isolate anyone, from the decisions.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I was just going to tell you that before you got on the Zoom, we discussed the fact that we actually don't have any minutes to approve after all. So you're free to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Okay. I was just looking for the agenda. If that was the only other item that you'd seen on the agenda, then I'm good with that. I think we've sort of melded the first 3 items from the agenda into one.
Yeah.
So with that, I would say,
No, still hold that because Paul is desperately trying to get your attention.
oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at another application. Yes, Paul.
So I just have a question. It's my favorite topic of Warner's Pond. Given all the changes in timing and everything, do we have a warrant article to prepare in terms of that money? Or is that because that may be something we need to discuss in the next meeting or so?
Whether we ought to be converting that funding into reallocating it?
Yeah, I mean, Delia mentioned that at a meeting that she was anticipating that the dredging funding.
Yeah.
I don't know, but now it's up in the air. I mean, NRC isn't moving forward with any plan, so for all I know, they could.
Well, Paul, what I think is appropriate is that we ask Delia to attend our next meeting to say whether she's I don't want to say whether she's ready to relinquish that funds. I guess it's really whether she's in a position to expend those funds in accordance with the original purpose within the 3-year timeline of the grant agreement, or whether it's time to consider relinquishing them for further future appropriation. Anyways, I think where we are is we need to hear from Delia.
I agree. We ought to put that.
Okay. So Anne, could you add that to our December meeting to ask Delia to attend, because we've got questions about the Warner Pond, the 2 appropriate funding rounds that were specific to dredging.
Yes, of course. I'll ask her.
Great. Thanks, Paul, for raising that. I appreciate that. With that, Eve, unless you've got anything further to say, I would say we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your attention and participation. Yeah. We made great progress. We'll see. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving. We'll see you in December.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay. Bye-bye.
December 4th, I think.
Yep.
5th.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Very good. All right. Have a good evening. Good night.